Hello, this is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on all matters property, supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. And we're live every Sunday from 10 a.m. on YouTube, Facebook, and on our website, propertymatterstv.co.uk. And if you're watching on our website, we'd love you to give us a Google review. Just hit the Google review button on the home page. Please get involved by adding your comments in the comments section below. If you'd like to email us, the address is hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. The show's also available as a podcast out on Monday at 10 a.m. following the Sunday broadcast, and it's available on all of those major platforms that you see over on the right-hand side of the screen. We're also live every Monday on Dilsa Radio as well, so we welcome new listeners there. Let's take a look at the week's property news with a special guest this week. Alongside our resident expert, Joe Joshi, we have Howard Starr joining us, who is, of course, a senior branch manager at Ellis & Co, because we're talking a lot today about rentals. Joe, welcome, and hello to Howard.
Hello.
Hello, good morning, and welcome to Howard. Thanks for joining us, Howard. It'll be an interesting new view to get. We've always had Cam join us, give us his wisdom, but we're looking forward to yours in terms of the big letting stories that we have.
Indeed, because the rental market report is out from Zoopla. This is for March 2023. And it makes for some interesting reading. The residential rental market has been running very hot for 2 years, they're saying, with something of a perpetual boom in residential rents, which continue to run well ahead of earnings growth. So average rents for new lets have increased by 11.1% in the last year, while earnings have increased by just 6.7%. Rental inflation has slowed slightly from 12.3% in mid-2022, but there's no sign of any imminent slowdown. Rents have risen by 20% in 3 years, an extra £2,220 a year, which is an ongoing concern for renters, especially those, of course, on lower incomes and also on housing benefit. So this report takes a detailed look beneath the headlines into what is driving the boom in rental demand and why we're not seeing supply side response. The two key questions are: when will we see rental growth slow, and is there a risk to rapid rise in rents, meaning landlords overshoot and need to correct in the future? So I guess let's go straight to Howard and ask you, Howard, what is the situation are you seeing this kind of situation that rents are running hot in your area?
Oh yeah, very much so. Looking at rents over the last couple of years, as the report says, have increased, and at the moment don't seem to be showing much sign of slowing down, with properties coming available and being taken very, very quickly. Sometimes multiple tenants trying to get the same property are obviously pushing the rents up. And with less properties coming to the market, you've got the supply and demand effect, which is just fueling the fire, so to speak.
And Joe, are you seeing the same thing?
Yes, Paul. I mean, at the end of the day, the whole market has had a change. There was a time going back in history when property sales was actually the prime earner and the lettings was the poorer relation. It has now become the other way around, primarily because of the affordability that is now unachievable by first-time buyers in some of the properties they want to buy. The rental market obviously is now at a boom stage, and with the current circumstances in lending and of course the hike in interest rates that's been continues to go on, it has actually moved everybody towards rental purely because of that uncertainty. And therefore is the ordinary thing of supply and demand, and as the demand is very high and the supply is getting tighter, of course rent prices have been going up, and subsequently it's made things a little bit challenging. On the other side of that, and the flip side of that, of course, is that the things that the government's been doing to try and deter individual and investor landlords into the buy-to-let, kind of put them on a bit of a wall to say which way do they go? Do they actually just sell up and get out, or do they continue? And I think you'll find that at the moment the choice is somewhat limited, other than to continue.
Yeah, they're saying that annual rental inflation is up at 11.1%, and demand relative to the 5-year average is up 51%. Apparently, the estate agency branches are seeing rental demand at double the 5-year average. And demand for rented homes and rental inflation took off as the economy reopened in spring of 2021. And there were two key measures that the government put in place that really helped, and that was, of course, opening the doors for immigration to allow in skilled workers, relax the major shake-up of the visa rules, and attracted skilled talent was one of the drivers of record high net immigration, totaling 504,000 people in the year to June 2022. And of course, also they were making sure that they had the right sort of workers coming in, and the Ukrainians were also brought into the country under the humanitarian schemes, and that's certainly not helped to exacerbate the situation, or to ease the situation, has it, Joe?
No, I mean the demand for housing and letting is huge, and even as early as this week, there have been changes being made and muted about rehousing the refugees from hotels into lettable properties, be it blocks of flats or a new estate being put together on airfields and former runways, etc., from the Royal Air Force. And sometimes these are drastic but yet unthought out measures, and I think that they are very unthought. They've not been thought through at all in my mind, and I think people are just reacting. Whereas the situation with on the road, I mean, where Howard probably will be able to give you a much more current picture, because being in a branch literally at the high street levels, you would actually see the number of footfall and inquiries that will actually determine whether the demand is now outstripping the supply directly.
Yeah, again, very much so. I mean, to give examples, properties are made available um, on the property portals, and within the first 6 to 8 hours, you can receive upwards of 50, 80 inquiries for people looking to rent, people looking to commit to a property without even viewing it, which we don't work with because it's not great. You have to get people into these places, but people are, I would say, to coin a phrase, sort of clambering over themselves to get the property.
Yeah, we have. Obviously, the record immigration driving up the demand, and of course also overseas students are at a record high, 680,000 students in 2022. Up to 2022, and then another 122,000 in the 2 years since then, a year since then rather, thanks to the new visa rules. So that's exacerbating the situation. Howard, are you also seeing that the number of properties being offered for rent is falling off, or do you think that's fairly static?
No, I think it's sort of holding itself where it is. In a normal market, you've got tenants moving because they're moving area, or their family's getting bigger, so they're moving from smaller properties to bigger properties. At the moment, tenants are not looking to move as freely as they used to. So therefore, the influx of new properties coming to the market is being held back. Part of that is because obviously, if they move out of a property into a new one, the rents are going to be higher. Sometimes landlords will hold rents a bit for they've had there a few years, but when they come available, they go straight back to the current market value. And there's also a number of landlords who, for various reasons, have decided now's the time to maybe come out of that particular market.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we're also seeing record levels of retirement, Joe. People have just said, you know what, I think this is probably a good time after what happened in the pandemic for us to just call it a day in general. So landlords seem to be maybe doing the same thing. Maybe this is the sort of full stop and a new paragraph.
Yes, there's definitely a full stop and a new paragraph, a new chapter, and a new type of landlord coming into the market, because the older generation, as such, which were established for many years into the rental market, have either decided that taxation is now becoming a huge issue, and actually maintenance and managing them is becoming an issue, and also they've got to look at the exit situation from their point of view, that it's better for them to exit while they're around, than for someone else to have to exit and pay exorbitant tax duties that will be due going forward. So yeah, there is a new type of landlord coming into the marketplace. The other reason for that, Paul, is that basically the amount of borrowing and the funding. So a lot of people, a lot of the older ones had properties that may be unencumbered to some extent and were enjoying the full benefit of the rent that was coming in. But now we're having to consider people that are going to have to borrow and start again. And some of the older properties may be not as attractive as some of the new ones are. And if you look around the country, there's a lot of new builds that have been going on, even though they seem to be a lot that seem to be vacant and not finished. And people are sort of saying, oh, they're already pre-let, but there's still enough around. The problem is, I think that the directive or what the government's been doing in terms of the taxation policies is actually driving some previous landlords and deterring some new ones.
It's interesting that Zoopla talk about the fact that the number of privately rented homes remains largely static. In actual fact, from 2021, in 2021, there were 5.5 million private rented homes in Great Britain, slightly more than the 5.4 in total in 2016. This follows a doubling of the number of private rented homes between 2002 and 2015, which of course was driven by landlords using buy-to-let mortgages. So in simple terms, a static supply of rental housing means new investment that adds supply is offset by properties leaving the sector as landlords dispose of rented homes as part of an ongoing portfolio rationalisation or exit from the rental market altogether. So is the suggestion that actually there's probably almost as many coming in as there are going out, as churn going on. Do you see any of that, Howard?
Yeah, I think you've got it right there. There are, I think, as Joe said, people looking to exit the market for various different reasons. I think the complexity of being a landlord in today's market than it was maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. I used to get quite a few buyers who were looking to remortgage, an older buyer looking to remortgage from their residential property to buy the investment property. That doesn't happen much anymore, and a lot of them are either incidental landlords or professional landlords. But it's I think being a landlord has become a much more difficult thing to be. And at the moment, that's where I think you've got the leveling off, where you've got just enough people staying in it to sort of allow the ones that want to get out, and the lack of new ones coming in. So it's holding its own, but only just, I think.
Yeah, and they're saying there's a slight slowdown in the landlord sales in face of weaker sales in the sales market. Some 11% of homes listed for sale on Zoopla in early 2023 were formerly rented. This is a reduction from just over 13% last year. So it still remains above average. And the tax changes and growing regulation, as you say, and the higher borrowing costs are leading many private landlords to review their portfolio and the pros and cons of investing in housing. But do you think, Joe, there might be an element where they're saying, well, look, I'm going to find it hard to sell because it's not a seller's market at the moment. The price is going down from what I could have got from it. So maybe I should just hang on for it. And when I look at rents going up the way they are, maybe I could make the figures work or get close to making them work for a while.
Yeah, I think basically, Paul, where that is happening is that it is a needs must and a choice that you don't really want to have, or have, should I say. And the reason is that, yes, prices, if you speak generally, are a bit tipping down a little bit, perhaps more of a correction. Loan to value borrowing has been high. So subsequently, they're really not in a position to sell. And even if they were to sell, in some cases, and there was any margin, that would be taken up by any CGT, capital gains tax, because it's an investment property. So overall, it's now stacking against them to sell, but because the rents have been going up, it is just about getting them into a point where the rental income coming in is actually beginning to allow to wash its own face. The problem is, it's the long-standing old rents that are causing the problem. The new ones obviously are paying what they have to pay, and God knows how they're paying those, to be perfectly honest with you, but they are having to pay them. But the ones that were in there for a long time, those are the ones that are going to find it hard to lift. So I mean, at one time, one bedroom flats were £800-900. In some cases now, one bedroom flats are £1,200-1,400. And so that could work better in the new let, but it doesn't work better for the old lets in that sense. The other side of the coin on this is that institutions have come in thick and fast over the last 10 years. It's a bit like the man from the Pru and his bicycle clips, Paul. They used to work on this sort of drip process. And what's happened is a lot of institutions have come in now and started to buy portfolios or buy out letting agents that provide a drip income out of managing those things. And so that makes it a little bit more challenging because A, regulations have become tight, and B, as a corporate with plenty of money behind them, they can probably comply more easily to those regulations than perhaps small independent people can. So the attraction for corporations is in, and that's pushing out the small independent landlord. In my opinion, I'm sure Howard would have something to add to that because obviously he must see it, more on the front line.
Yeah, there is an element of that happening out there in the marketplace, but it's you're quite right with the older lets where you've got established tenants and people that are not looking to move. The rents are not really at today's level, and that's making it difficult because the landlords are having to remortgage where there's a mortgage in place. And if you've got a tenant that's been there 3, 4, 5, 6 years that you don't want to move on, but you're now fixed rate is maybe 5.99, 6.25 as opposed to being 4s and 3s last time they remortgaged 2, 3 years ago. Obviously the difference isn't there anymore, so it's making it very difficult for them. And those landlords are looking to either renegotiate or try and bring their property back to the marketplace.
Yeah,
But the institutions are there as well, but it's affecting the individual landlords.
Yeah, the report talks about the economics of the private landlord changing fundamentally. The equity needed to buy new rented homes with a mortgage has been increasing in recent years as a result of rising house prices, lower rental yields, and tighter lending criteria. This has been exacerbated over the last 6 months by rising mortgage rates. So buy-to-let mortgages are generally interest only. Lenders require the rental income generated by a property to be at least 125% of the mortgage interest payments for lower rate taxpayers, and an increase of this increases to 145% for higher rate taxpayers, reflecting tax changes made in 2016. Today, banks are stress testing the affordability of new buy-to-let loans much more stringently than they used to. And actually, if we look at the chart here, you can see the difference between Q1 2022 and Q1 2023, the amount of deposit needed to buy to let in various parts of the country. And obviously you've got higher rate taxpayers paying more. But you can see in London the shoot up in the size of deposit required to get a new buy-to-let. So basically, it just doesn't stack up, does it, Howard? You've got to find a huge amount of money, particularly when you consider that rental yield from that property. So in London, for example, the equity needed to invest has jumped from 129,000 to over 257,000, as you can see on the graph, or 50% of the property value. And it's a sizable deposit to find when the gross rental yield is going to be around 4%.
Yeah, it's very much the case with the calculations on how the lenders look to lend on buy-to-lets. It's very rarely based on an individual landlord's income. It's based on the rental return. And obviously, as the property prices had increased over the last couple of years, and rents hadn't moved, interest rates go up, and you haven't got the difference there. So it makes it much more difficult. Hence, the higher deposits required in order to make the calculations work. And that's where the rent increases are starting to help a bit. But having to put such a large amount down to purchase a buy-to-let property makes it, in a lot of cases, out of reach for people that would have done it 5, 10, 15 years ago.
And as you said earlier on, the amount of regulation required to actually keep the thing running and to stay on the right side of the law is just beyond what most normal people that are doing this as a side hustle, if you like, would we want to take on. But having said that, Joe, there is regional differences there. So yes, London and the southeast, as you might expect, and the east and southwest of this country, all seeing massive rises in the amount of equity they need to put down. But if you get to look in some of those areas like the northwest or in Scotland or even in the northeast, not a lot of change there, but you're probably going to have to get a 60 or 70% loan to value mortgage.
Yes, I mean, London is almost at 50% now, Paul, in order to even give it a return on an average flat price. I mean, 4% return is just not palatable anymore under the current circumstances. And then if you're plowing 50% into it to borrow, to actually purchase the property, to give you a return of 4%, when we know that if you're putting that same money into the bank, it's 4.25%. As opposed to 4% return. So the attraction in London is becoming less attractive. Yet in other parts of the country, it's probably better. But of course, we know historically that whilst the levelling up and the commitment to try and move people to other parts of the country, it just doesn't have the attraction of the bright lights of London. And even then, even though during the pandemic time, we found lots and lots of people going for, running for the race for space was the punchline word at the time. I mean, they're now sort of legging it back for the race for less space into the biggest towns and cities. And even when workers were working, from home, that is worn away now with quite a big mental health issue where people are wanting to get back into an environment where they got colleagues and they want to work with other people and be around. So there's a lot of changes that the underlying changes that actually we don't see on the front line, or at least the customer doesn't see it. But we see that happening in these graphs where you can see that London is getting expensive to buy and then to rent and get a return, and the other parts of the country is still attractive, but not attractive for people to be there if they can help it.
They say that there's a continued interest in investing in property, but focusing now on buying lower value homes, probably in less desirable areas, with a better rental yield, and looking at sectors of the market where that might happen. So, for example, like, say, in the northeast and the northwest. But I guess you're going to have to be fairly near where your rental properties are to be able to service them, I would imagine. Do you have many remote landlords from far away that are renting property in your area, Howard?
Not huge amounts. The majority of landlords are relatively local. You get situations which changes where they are, based in the UK and then going overseas, or coming to the UK, spend some time and then go back to overseas. But generally, landlords have rented properties and buy rented properties within an area they're familiar with. There's always a worry that the non-professional, the incidental landlord is not going to buy something in Middlesbrough, whereas a professional one might buy because it's to them, it's their business, and they can control that sort of thing.
Yeah, there's a new investment focus on revenue and yield, and we can see in this next graph here a number of interesting scenarios. So let me just take you through it on the screen here, and for the benefit of those listening on the podcast who can't see the screen. So what we have here is how the face of the PRS, the private rented sector, is changing. So HMOs are at 9% of the total rental market, but they're delivering a yield of between 7 and 10%. Then you've got holiday lets and short lets, which are 8% as well, at 8%, and they've got an 8 to 12% yield, which is an interesting one. We'll come on to that in a second. But then you've got the long lets to people on housing benefit, which is 18% of the market, and then long lets, which is the normal market rents, which is obviously the vast majority. Almost half of the rentals out there are long let market rents at 48%, which are delivering between 4 and 7%. So we did know, and we have reported on this show, that there's been a much increased interest in HMOs. Obviously, there's more increased regulation on that, but HMOs seem to be able to deliver better yield. But this holiday and short let seems an interesting proposition at 8 to 12%. Are you seeing a rise in interest in that in the market, Howard?
Yeah, there's a little bit. I think a lot of that is based on locations.
Yeah.
Okay, you tend to find that the short lets isn't really a. If you take London as an example, the suburbs you don't get a huge amount of short lets. It's mainly in town, the people coming over for short term. So it's not a huge player in the game that I work in, but I do know that there are more of it than there used to be.
HMOs, Joe, that's one that seems to be the houses of multiple occupation. Don't want to get too jargon-esque about all of this, do we? So a single dwelling which has been divided into little individual flats, and people are renting the rooms in there. And that can prove to be quite profitable when it's done properly.
Yes, it is. And also the reason why that's become popular, because it's just a big challenge for individuals to go and want to rent all by themselves, even if you're looking at a one-bedroom apartment to rent, when the rents are almost double, it's a challenge. So people are finding it easier to be perhaps going back in time and, renting a room and sharing the facilities and getting on that. So the HMO side of it, the problem with HMOs is, again, if it's done correctly, they can be really profitable and a good place for people to be. But sadly, most HMOs don't have a great reputation, because they're just cramming in lots and lots of people into the rooms, and finding that is not actually helping the marketplace. So it gives it a bad reputation, though it gives the landlord a very good yield or investment on return. It doesn't always make it good reading for tenants who are probably struggling in there. I don't know if you've, I just want to sort of switch on the subject there, but recently things have got probably a little bit more challenging for housing associations and councils, because the government has, I don't know if anybody's been listening, but we've been running ads now on radio, which I'm sure are a bit suicidal to a large extent, because they're saying to tenants, "Oh, if your bathroom isn't working or things aren't right, you've got to call us." I mean, I'd hate to be the receptionist listening to those calls right now, on the basis of what they. But I suppose what they're trying to do is they're trying to sort of bring up this leveling up and saying, we're making noises to national or housing association types of landlords. But of course, what happens with that is the ordinary private sector landlord is going to get tarred with the same brush, because we'll say, well, if they can do it, you can do it. I've had a tap that's been leaking for a while, and you haven't bothered to come in and put a washer in it. And so all of those things are going to make things even more challenging for landlords. And of course, to top it, that with the potential of the EPC C rating, which is obviously now looming closer than we think, even though it's not become law. But the way the government's going, I can't see it long before it becomes law, and then 2025 is not that far either.
Is it? We're talking in the report about Howard, renting to those on housing benefits. I mean, there was always there was a belief that at one time, you were guaranteed your rent. You'd always get your rent. It was, set by the government, and you would get what you needed, and it was reliable income. Maybe not the best yield, but is it still popular, housing benefit for landlords?
Yeah, it very much so. I mean, there's still quite a high percentage of prospective tenants who do come in looking for rented properties with either some sort of assistance or full assistance with housing benefit. I think there was a stigma years ago that there were, people on housing benefit weren't great tenants. Um, that was, I think, more of a feeling than in actual fact. But even now, I would say there's a good 30 to 40% of inquiries we get have some sort of element of help with the rent. But there's still a lot out there.
Yeah. It's interesting they're saying that in London the yield is probably the lowest in the UK, although the price of buying the property, and also, of course, the amount that we revealed a moment ago, the deposit to put down to buy the buy-to-let in the first place, it's actually proving to reduce the amount of rental yield in the long run.
Becoming a real issue now, Paul. And the yield, for, like we said earlier on, that if you're buying in London now, the problem with that is that your deposit is almost 50%, Whereas in other parts, you will maybe 25 or 20% on a buy-to-let mortgage. The problem is the buy-to-let mortgage has become so expensive that it's not giving the right returns on the yield. So London is becoming more expensive. And yes, people are moving further out to try and do that. If you are as Howard says, a institutional landlord, you don't really care because you're looking just to sort of almost a bums on seats situation. You just want to fill the rooms, fill the property, and get the best return you can for the investment, and that doesn't matter anywhere in the country. But the others that are, the sort of chosen landlords are probably thinking, well, actually, I don't want to be too far, and therefore, what do I want to invest in? So that their borrowing becomes a bit more challenging.
So the question is, where does this all go at the end of the day? I mean, are rents at risk of overshooting, for example? I mean, surely there becomes a point when, tenants just say, I just literally cannot afford to pay that. And if everybody's in that situation, surely at some point the rents will come crashing down to where affordability currently sits. Howard, what's your thoughts on where
Yeah,
this is all going to end up?
yeah. My personal thought is, people. It's a bit. I was talking to one of the guys in the office during the week, and we were talking about when you get 15, 20, 30, 40 people want to view a property, you create this sort of eBay auction type thing where it's easy to click and click and click. And what you tend to do is you get into the excitement of clicking and forgetting how much you're actually committing to. And the worry at the moment is that properties are coming back on the market after being let for 2 or 3 years. The rents are increasing. We're getting people offering above it because they want to secure the property. And the worry there is that people are doing it to secure it. Once they get in, and then they get the added cost of gas, electricity, council tax, food, life, it would hit home and suddenly say, well, hang on, we may have overcommitted here. And I think we're not a million miles away from hitting that level where people are just saying anything to get a property, and 3, 4 months in, are going to start struggling to pay it. And I don't think we're a million miles away from that.
Now, you can understand a situation where, you've gone in and you've offered the rent that's being asked. And, as you say, you've been turned down 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times.
Mm.
And then you realise that that's why you were turned down, because someone's over offered. And then you think, well, if I can't beat them, join them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is the case. There's people clambering to get to secure the property, and you get a little bit of an auction situation. It's not something we encourage, because, as we do know, it's auction. People can get a bit carried away and commit to more than they really want to.
Joe, what's your thoughts on where all this is going to end up?
I think at the moment people are committing just because getting a roof over their head is important, and once they're in, they will. And there's always going to be a number of people that will just say, okay, well, I'll do this to get in, so that I can actually at least have the roof over my head, and then I'll deal with it when I'm in. And that's the worry for the landlords, is that sometimes, so it's very important for landlords and agents and of course the tenants to be about as true and as real as they can. And it may be that the highest offer is not always the best offer. It may be that the person that is slightly lower in the offer might be a stronger candidate who has sustainability and is able to have a longevity in that renting, as opposed to somebody who might pay high, find that they're locked them in, and then find that 6 months down the road they're struggling, which then means that the landlord and the agent are back to square one trying to find another person, and you might have a void period. So if you have a void period in that time, to be honest with you, you've done yourself no favors, because you should have taken perhaps the lower offer but more stronger than the one that's higher, and then let's have a void period, because that void period has actually now cost you.
In terms of affordability, they're saying average rents expressed as a percentage of earnings are now at or close to a 10-year high in all regions except London. And this will start to impact the pace of rental growth over 2023, which we'll expect to slow to 4 to 5% by the year end. So we're seeing those rentals just rising. And I guess landlords are having to somehow pass on the extra cost of the borrowing, presumably, to the tenant, which is one of the reasons why this is happening. But they can't see much much change in this situation. It's just going to continue like this through the rest of the year. So I suppose, Howard, do you have any thoughts and tips for those people who are continually getting turned down for properties, who don't want to offer over the rental asking price?
Yeah, listen, it's extremely difficult for those sort of people, as we've discussed. People need to have a roof over their head. People need places to live, and it is extremely difficult when you can only rent a property, obviously, to one party, and you've got to turn away 5, 6, 8, or 10 other people. I think that what we're saying to people is they need to be very proactive in sourcing properties, making sure they're talking to agents regularly, keeping an eye on what comes available, and making themselves available to get out and see these properties. But it's extremely difficult, and I can understand the frustration that a lot of people have when all they want to do is house themselves.
One thought, Joe, if you're looking to sell a property on the open market at the moment, and obviously the market's weak and people aren't buying, as you've said earlier on, what do you think about the notion that perhaps they should even consider, looking at all these rises in rental incomes that they could get from properties, should they consider renting out the property they can't sell?
I think that's going to be inevitable at this precise moment, Paul. And if a property's on the market and there are circumstances that means that they've got to sell, and if they've got to sell for whatever those circumstances are, they will sell and have to sell at the price that is being offered in the marketplace. If they can't afford to take that, then they've got to start to sort of think about, whether they can sustain it, rent a room out, share it, or if necessary, just move out and move back home. I've known of situations where I've spoken to people where they've now actually rented the house out and moved back in with parents because they'd rather not lose the money on the house. The parents have said, don't lose the money on the house. You may as well come back to your own room. As much as they probably don't really want to see them back home, but they do, they get them back home. And the next thing is they rent the house out or the flat out in order to make sure that it's washing its face. So many situations are having to be considered at this moment.
Well, gentlemen, I think that's probably run us out of time, actually. Just that one report, which was so full of detail, really has taken up all of our conversation today, as I suspected it might do. So, Howard, lovely to have you for your debut on the show. Well done. You did a great job for us. And thank you for your wisdom and also your on-the-street knowledge that you've got right there at the coalface. Joe, thank you as always. And thank you for watching Property Matters. We'll be back at the same time next week.